The tears you tried to silence in the dark were not wasted. The ones that soaked your pillow when no one was watching, the ones you wiped away quickly because you were tired of explaining your pain, God saw them. He saw the moment your strength ran out. He saw the breath you struggled to steady. He saw the questions you were afraid to ask out loud. And while the world slept, heaven paid attention. There are moments when the night feels heavier than the day. In the daylight, you can smile, you can perform, you can distract yourself. But when the lights go off and the noise fades, everything you've been holding back rises to the surface, the regrets, the disappointments, the prayers that feel unanswered, the fear that whispers, what if nothing changes? Last night, when you felt alone in that quiet battle, God was closer than you realized. When we say that your tears were seen by heaven, we are speaking about a truth that reaches deeper than emotion and touches the very heart of God. Many people grow up believing that strength means silence, that faith means never breaking down, that maturity means handling everything alone. But heaven does not measure strength the way humans do. Heaven pays attention to honesty, to surrender, to vulnerability before God. Every tear you cry is not wasted emotion. It is spiritual communication. When your heart breaks open before God, it releases something sacred into the atmosphere. God is not distant from your pain. He is not distracted by the noise of the world. He is personally attentive to the moments when you feel most fragile. Think about the nights when no one knows what you are carrying. The phone is silent. The room is dark. The distractions are gone. Your mind begins replaying conversations, disappointments, unanswered prayers, mistakes, and fears. Your chest feels heavy. Your breath shortens, and suddenly the tears begin to flow. In those moments, it is easy to believe that you are alone, that no one sees this hidden side of you. But heaven does. God watches over the tears you try to hide from everyone else. He notices the ones you wipe away quickly so no one asks questions. He sees the ones that fall quietly onto your pillow. Nothing about your pain escapes his awareness. There is something deeply comforting about knowing that God counts what we often dismiss. People may tell you to move on, to be stronger, to stop being emotional, to toughen up. But God does not minimize what hurts you. If it touches your heart, it touches his heart. When a tear falls from your eye, it does not disappear into nothingness. It is acknowledged, valued, remembered. That means your suffering is not meaningless. Your grief is not invisible. Your struggle is not ignored. Heaven records what earth overlooks. Your tears reveal your humanity, but they also reveal your faith. You don't cry because you have no hope. You cry because you care, because you long for change, because you still believe something better is possible. Tears are often prayers that words cannot form. Sometimes the pain is too deep, the confusion too heavy, the exhaustion too real to shape into sentences. So your soul speaks through tears. God understands that language perfectly. He does not need explanations. He reads the heart behind every drop. When heaven sees your tears, it means God is not only aware of your pain, but actively involved in your healing. Divine attention always carries divine intention. God never observes without compassion, and he never acknowledges without purpose. Your tears invite his nearness. They draw his comfort. They awaken his restoring power. Even when you do not feel an immediate change, something spiritual is taking place beneath the surface. Strength is being deposited. Peace is being planted. Hope is being gently rebuilt. Many people carry the false belief that their tears disqualify them from being strong believers. They think crying means their faith is weak or their prayers are failing. But the opposite is true. Your tears demonstrate that your heart is still soft, still open, still responsive to God. A hardened heart cannot cry. A disconnected soul cannot weep before God. Tears prove that you are still engaged in the journey, still trusting God enough to bring him your brokenness instead of hiding it. Heaven, seeing your tears also means that your story is not forgotten. Every season of waiting, every night of loneliness, every silent battle matters. God does not only celebrate your victories, he honors your endurance. He remembers the nights you chose to pray instead of quit, the moments you held on to faith, even when doubt was loud, the tears you cried but still got up the next morning and kept moving forward. Those moments shape your character and prepare your future. There is also a promise hidden inside this truth. If heaven sees your tears, heaven will also respond, not always in the timing you expect and not always in the way you imagine, but always in love and wisdom. God's response may come as comfort before breakthrough, peace before answers, strength before change. Sometimes the miracle is not the removal of the storm, but the calm he places inside you while you walk through it. And over time, you begin to notice that the pain that once controlled you no longer has the same power. That is heaven's quiet woe. RK unfolding. Knowing that God sees your tears allows you to stop pretending. You no longer need to impress God with perfection or hide behind religious performance. You can come as you are, tired, confused, wounded, hopeful, and still believing. That honesty creates intimacy with God. It deepens your trust. It reminds you that you are loved not because you are strong, but because you are His. When you truly embrace this truth, it changes how you face your struggles. You stop feeling invisible. You stop believing your pain is pointless. You begin to understand that even in your weakest moments, you are fully seen, fully known, and fully cared for by heaven. Your tears are not signs of defeat. They are sacred signals that your heart is alive, your faith is active, and your God is close. When we say that tears are not weakness, but faith in action, we are confronting one of the deepest misunderstandings people carry about strength and spirituality. Many have been taught that faith looks like constant confidence, unshaken smiles, and unbreakable composure. They believe that strong believers never cry, never doubt, never feel overwhelmed. But real faith is not the absence of emotion. It is the decision to bring every emotion to God instead of running away from Him. Tears do not mean your faith has collapsed. They mean your heart is still engaged in trusting God with what hurts the most. Crying before God is an act of surrender. It is the moment when you stop pretending you can handle everything on your own. It is when pride loosens its grip and humility opens the door for divine strength. Surrender is not giving up, it is giving over. You are placing your burden into hands greater than your own. That takes courage, it takes honesty, it takes faith to admit, Lord, I cannot do this without you. Tears become the language of that confession. Every tear represents a battle you refuse to ignore. You could have numbed yourself, distracted your pain, hardened your heart, or walked away from hope altogether. Instead, you allowed yourself to feel, to process, and to seek God in the middle of your struggle. That choice reflects spiritual maturity. Faith does not deny reality. It invites God into reality. Tears are not the collapse of belief. They are the evidence that belief is still alive and fighting for trust in the midst of uncertainty. There are moments when words fail. You may not know how to explain your pain. You may not have the energy to articulate your prayer. Your thoughts may be tangled with fear, disappointment, and confusion. In those moments, your tears speak louder than any sentence. God understands what your tears are saying, even when you cannot explain it yourself. They express longing, dependence, vulnerability, and hope all at once. Heaven recognizes that language instantly. Tears also reveal that you care deeply about what God is doing in your life. Indifference never cries. A heart that is given up does not weep. Only a heart that still believes there is more, that still desires healing, that still expects God to move, allows itself to break open emotionally. Your tears are not proof of defeat. They are proof that your heart refuses to settle for despair. They show that you are still reaching for God, even when the path feels unclear. When you cry before God, you are choosing trust over control. Control tries to manage outcomes, suppress emotions, and maintain appearance. Trust releases the need to perform and allows God to lead the process. Tears dismantle the illusion that you must always be strong, always composed, always in control. They remind you that you are human and that God delights in meeting you in your humanity. Faith grows strongest when it rests in God's sufficiency rather than your own endurance. Many people suppress tears because they fear vulnerability. They worry that crying makes them look weak, unstable, or unspiritual. But vulnerability is not weakness, it is courage. It takes bravery to allow God to see your raw emotions. It takes faith to open the door of your heart and say, here's the part of me that hurts. That openness creates space for healing, comfort, and restoration. What you hide cannot be healed. What you surrender can be transformed. Tears also soften the heart, keeping it sensitive to God's voice. When pain is buried instead of released, the heart becomes guarded and distant. But when tears flow in God's presence, walls come down. Pride dissolves. Sensitivity returns. You become more aware of God's comfort, His guidance, and His peace. Tears cleanse emotional wounds in ways that logic and discipline cannot accomplish alone. Crying in faith aligns you with truth. It acknowledges that you are not self-sufficient, that you need grace, that you need divine help. That alignment attracts God's strength. Divine power flows most freely into surrendered spaces. When you reach the end of your own strength and allow tears to fall, you create room for God's strength to rise within you. What feels like weakness on the outside becomes spiritual power on the inside. Your tears also protect your heart from bitterness. Pain that is never released turns into resentment, anger, and emotional numbness. But tears allow grief to move through you instead of settling inside you. They keep your heart tender rather than hardened. They help you forgive, heal, and remain open to hope. That is an act of spiritual wisdom and maturity. Faith expressed through tears teaches you dependence rather than performance. You stop measuring your spirituality by how well you hold yourself together and start measuring it by how deeply you trust God. You learn that God is not impressed by flawless appearances, but moved by sincere hearts. He is not asking you to be unbreakable. He is inviting you to be honest. When you allow yourself to cry before God, you are declaring that you still believe he is listening, that he still cares, that he is still able to move. That declaration may not come through spoken words, but heaven understands it clearly. Your tears are prayers soaked in trust. They are worship expressed through surrender. They are faith in motion, even when circumstances remain unchanged. Over time, you begin to notice that those moments of brokenness become moments of connection. You feel closer to God. You feel lighter emotionally. You sense renewed peace even before answers arrive. That is the quiet reward of surrender. Tears do not weaken your faith. They deepen it. They anchor you in humility, soften your heart, and strengthen your trust. So never shame your tears. Never silence your vulnerability before God. Let your tears remind you that your faith is alive, your heart is engaged, and your spirit is still reaching for hope. What looks fragile on the surface is often powerful in the spiritual realm. Your tears are not defeat. They are faith expressing itself honestly before a loving God. When we say that God works deepest in your darkest moments, we are touching a mystery of faith that challenges human understanding. Most people expect God to move whenever everything feels clear, joyful, and under control. We assume that light is where progress happens and that darkness only represents loss, confusion, or delay. But throughout life and spiritual growth, it is often in the hidden, quiet, painful seasons that the most meaningful transformation takes place. Darkness does not mean God has left. It often means God is working in ways your senses cannot yet detect. Dark seasons strip away distractions. When everything is comfortable, it is easy to rely on routines, resources, and self-confidence. But when pain enters, when uncertainty grows, when familiar support disappears, your heart becomes more attentive to what truly matters. You begin listening more deeply. You begin searching more sincerely. Your prayers become more honest. Your dependence on God becomes more real. In the darkness, superficial faith fades and authentic trust begins to grow. Many people mistake silence for absence. When prayers seem unanswered and circumstances remain unchanged, the mind quickly assumes that God is distant or inactive. But silence does not mean inactivity. A seed grows in silence beneath the soil long before it ever breaks the surface. Roots develop unseen before any fruit becomes visible. In the same way, God often develops your character, wisdom, patience, and resilience quietly before revealing outward change. What feels like stillness on the outside is often intense spiritual movement on the inside. Dark moments also reveal what is truly inside, the heart. Light can hide weaknesses behind appearances, but darkness exposes motives, fears, wounds, and desires that must be addressed for real growth to occur. God does not expose these things to shame you, but to heal you. He brings hidden pain to the surface so it can be touched by grace. He allows uncomfortable awareness so transformation can begin. Healing rarely happens in comfort zones. It happens in honest encounters with truth. When life becomes uncertain, your control begins to loosen. Plans fall apart. Expectations shift. The future becomes unclear. This loss of control feels frightening, but it creates space for trust. Trust is not learned when everything goes according to plan. Trust is learned when outcomes are uncertain, and you must lean on God's character rather than your own understanding. Darkness teaches you to walk by faith instead of sight. It trains your spirit to rely on what is eternal rather than what is visible. In dark seasons, God also reshapes identity. You begin to realize that your worth is not rooted in performance, success, approval, or comfort. When those things are shaken, you discover who you are apart from them. You learn that you are loved even when you are not producing, achieving, or impressing anyone. This revelation brings deep freedom. It stabilizes your identity and strengthens your confidence in God's unconditional love. Pain has a way of slowing life down. It forces reflection. It creates awareness. It invites honesty. While this can feel uncomfortable, it opens the door for wisdom to grow. You start asking deeper questions about purpose, direction, values, and meaning. You become more sensitive to what truly matters and less attached to what once distracted you. Darkness clarifies priorities. It refines focus. It matures perspective. Spiritual strength is not built in ease, but in endurance. Muscles grow when resistance is applied. Faith grows when pressure challenges it. Dark moments stretch your capacity to trust, forgive, wait, and hope. Each time you choose to stay faithful in uncertainty, something inside you strengthens. You may not feel powerful in the process, but resilience is being formed quietly. The strength you will need for future seasons is being developed now. God also uses darkness to deepen compassion. When you experience pain, you become more sensitive to the suffering of others. Your heart becomes more tender. Your empathy increases. You learn how to comfort, encourage, and support people with authenticity rather than theory. Your own wounds become pathways of healing for others. What once hurt you becomes a source of wisdom and connection. Dark seasons teach you the value of God's presence more than his provision. When external blessings feel limited, his nearness becomes your anchor. You learn that peace does not come from circumstances aligning perfectly, but from knowing you are not walking alone. God's presence becomes more real, more personal, more intimate in the dark. Because distractions fade and awareness deepens. It is also in darkness that hidden potential emerges. Talents, gifts, creativity, and spiritual insight often awaken in seasons of solitude and reflection. When noise decreases, clarity increases. When busyness slows, awareness grows. God uses quiet seasons to awaken purpose that might never surface in constant motion. Many callings are birthed in unseen places long before they become visible in public. The darkest moments often become the foundation for the brightest testimonies. What you overcome becomes the story that strengthens others. What you survive becomes the evidence of God's faithfulness. What you endure becomes the proof of his sustaining power. When you look back, you will often realize that the season you once questioned became the season that shaped you most profoundly. Darkness is not the enemy when God is present within it. It becomes a classroom, a refining fire, a place of spiritual construction. While you may not enjoy the process, you will appreciate the results. Maturity, wisdom, humility, patience, courage, and deeper faith are born in these seasons. So when you find yourself walking through a dark moment, resist the urge to assume abandonment. Instead, remain attentive. Stay open. Keep trusting. Something meaningful is unfolding beneath the surface. God is not absent in your darkness. He is working deeply, carefully, intentionally, shaping you for a future you cannot yet fully see. When we say T, add every tear is a prayer that activates heaven. We are recognizing a spiritual reality that goes beyond spoken language. Many people believe prayer must always be articulated with perfect words, structure, and clarity. They feel pressure to explain their needs correctly, to sound faithful enough, or to express themselves in a certain way for God to listen. But heaven does not depend on vocabulary. God listens to the heart long before he listens to the mouth. When words fail and emotions overflow, tears become a sacred form of communication between your soul and God. There are moments when pain is too deep to describe. Loss, disappointment, betrayal, exhaustion, and fear can overwhelm the mind to the point where sentences collapse. You may try to pray, but find yourself unable to form coherent thoughts. In those moments, your tears speak what your lips cannot. They express longing, surrender, dependence, and desperation all at once. God understands that language perfectly. He is not confused by emotion. He is moved by sincerity. Your tears become honest prayers rising directly to heaven. Tears reveal truth. They strip away pretense and performance. When you cry before God, you are not managing appearances or protecting your image. You are standing exposed in your real condition. That honesty carries spiritual power. Heaven responds not to perfection, but to authenticity. God is drawn to hearts that are open, vulnerable, and sincere. Tears create that openness naturally. They remove pride, soften resistance, and invite divine compassion into your space. Every tear carries intention, even when you are not consciously aware of it. Some tears cry out for comfort. Some ask for clarity. Some plead for breakthrough. Some release grief. Some surrender control. Heaven reads the intention behind each tear. What feels like emotional release on earth is spiritual communication in the unseen realm. God receives those tears as petitions, intercession, and worship blended together. Tears also demonstrate trust. You do not cry in front of someone you do not trust. Vulnerability requires safety. When you allow yourself to cry before God, you are declaring that you believe He cares, that He sees you, and that He is able to hold your pain. That trust activates spiritual connection. Faith does not always shout. Sometimes it weeps quietly. Heaven honors that kind of faith deeply. When tears rise as prayer, they invite divine movement. God is not distant from suffering. He is compassionate and responsive. Compassion is not passive emotion. It moves toward action. When God sees a broken heart sincerely reaching for Him, He draws near with comfort, strength, wisdom, and peace. Sometimes He changes circumstances. Sometimes He changes the heart first. Either way, heaven responds. Your tears also release emotional weight that blocks spiritual clarity. When pain is suppressed, the heart becomes heavy and distracted. But when tears flow in God's presence, emotional press, your lifts, the soul breathes again. Space opens for peace, perspective, and spiritual sensitivity. Tears cleanse inner tension the way rain refreshes dry ground. After tears, clarity often follows. Heaven also uses tears to align your will with God's will. In moments of brokenness, ego loosens its grip, pride fades, control surrenders. Your heart becomes more receptive to divine guidance. You begin to listen more than you speak. You become open to correction, redirection, and healing. Tears soften the soil of the heart so that God's truth can take root more deeply. Tears carry spiritual authority because they come from humility. God resists pride but draws near to humility. A heart that weeps before God acknowledges need, dependence, and surrender. That posture attracts grace. Grace empowers transformation. Grace restores strength. Grace opens doors that effort alone cannot open. Tears position you under the flow of grace. Your tears also participate in spiritual warfare. When you cry out to God in pain rather than turning to bitterness, isolation, or despair, you are choosing faith over darkness. You are resisting the enemy's attempt to harden your heart or steal your hope. Every tear offered to God becomes a declaration that your faith remains alive. That choice carries spiritual power. Sometimes heaven's response to tears is immediate peace. Sometimes it is gradual healing. Sometimes it is divine redirection. Sometimes it is quiet reassurance. But every tear released in faith is received. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is ignored. Heaven keeps record of every sincere cry of the heart. Tears remind you that prayer is relational, not mechanical. You are not speaking into emptiness. You are communicating with a loving Father who listens attentively. Prayer is not about saying the right words. It is about opening the heart. Tears naturally open the heart when words cannot. As you grow spiritually, you begin to recognize that some of your deepest encounters with God happen not in moments of strength, but in moments of brokenness. Tears become gateways to intimacy. They deepen trust. They strengthen connection. They draw you closer to God's heart. When you allow your tears to flow before God, you are not collapsing spiritually. You are engaging spiritually. You are inviting heaven into your pain. You are allowing divine love to meet human weakness. That exchange transforms sorrow into strength, confusion into clarity, and fear into peace. So never underestimate the power of a tear offered to God. What seems small on earth carries weight in heaven. Your tears are not silent. They are prayers that rise, connect, and activate divine compassion and divine response in ways you may not immediately see, but will one day fully understand. When we say that delay is not denial and that timing is divine, we are addressing one of the hardest struggles of faith, waiting. The human heart longs for immediate answers, quick relief, and fast solutions. When pain lasts longer than expected, or prayers seem unanswered, doubt begins whispering that God has forgotten, ignored, or rejected the request altogether. But delay does not mean God has said no. It often means God is working through a process that serves a greater purpose than immediate satisfaction. Timing matters in everything that carries lasting value. A seed planted too early will freeze. A harvest taken too soon will lack nourishment. Growth requires seasons. In the same way, God understands the precise timing required for what He's developing in your life. What feels slow to you is often carefully measured in heaven. God sees the full picture, not only what you want now, but what you will need later. He shapes outcomes that align with your future, not just your present emotions. Waiting exposes the condition of the heart. When everything comes quickly, gratitude may be shallow and dependence may be minimal. But when waiting stretches over time, deeper trust is formed. Patience matures character. Endurance strengthens faith. Waiting teaches you how to rest in God's sovereignty rather than striving for control. It trains you to rely on His wisdom instead of your urgency. Many people assume that if God truly cared, He would move faster. But love is not measured by speed, it is measured by wisdom. A loving parent does not give a child everything immediately if it would harm their development. In the same way, God protects you from receiving things before you are spirit. You'll be ready to steward them. Sometimes what you are asking for requires growth in discipline, humility, emotional stability, or wisdom before it can safely enter your life. Delay also protects you from unseen dangers. There are paths you might rush into that appear right, but would bring unnecessary pain, distraction, or compromise later. God's timing shields you from shortcuts that look attractive but carry hidden consequences. What feels like slow progress may actually be divine protection quietly guarding your future. Waiting seasons deepen intimacy with God. When answers do not arrive quickly, prayer becomes less transactional and more relational. You stop praying only for outcomes and begin seeking God's presence, guidance, and peace. Your relationship with Him matures beyond asking into trusting. This shift strengthens spiritual roots that will sustain you through future challenges. Delay refines motives. Sometimes you begin realizing that what you thought you wanted may not fully align with what you truly need. Waiting creates space for reflection, clarity, and realignment. God reshapes desires gently so that what He gives later will bring lasting fulfillment rather than temporary excitement. In the waiting, God often works behind the scenes, arranging circumstances, aligning people, preparing resources, and opening future opportunities. Much of this work is invisible at first. You only see the final outcome, not the preparation process. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean nothing is happening. Heaven's work often unfolds quietly before becoming visible. Waiting also strengthens spiritual discernment. It teaches you to listen more carefully, to recognize God's voice, and to differentiate between impulse and wisdom. It sharpens your sensitivity to divine direction. What feels like stillness externally becomes growth internally. Delay builds resilience. When you learn to trust God through prolonged uncertainty, your faith becomes stable rather than fragile. You become less shaken by setbacks and more grounded in God's character. That stability becomes a foundation for future responsibilities and blessings. There are also lessons that only waiting can teach. Gratitude deepens when something is finally received after perseverance. Humility grows when you recognize your dependence on God's grace rather than personal ability. Compassion increases when you understand what it feels like to hope for something over time. These qualities shape a mature and balanced life. Timing also ensures that what God gives you aligns with the right season of your life. You may desire something sincerely, but receiving it prematurely could overwhelm you, distract you, or pull you away from your true calling. God's wisdom protects you from mistiming blessings that could become burdens. Sometimes the delay is not about you alone. God may be aligning other people, healing other hearts, or arranging circumstances beyond your control. Your story intersects with others in ways you cannot fully see. Divine timing weaves multiple lives together for outcomes that bring greater impact than individual gain. When frustration arises during waiting, it is natural. But frustration can become an invitation to deeper trust rather than bitterness. Instead of asking only when, the heart begins asking who God is in this season, who you are becoming through this process, and who you are trusting for the outcome. Over time, you begin realizing that some of the greatest gifts God gave you were not the answers themselves, but the growth that happened while you waited. Your faith became stronger. Your wisdom expanded, your emotional maturity deepened, your relationship with God became more secure. These internal blessings remain long after circumstances change. Delay is not God withholding goodness, it is God preparing you for goodness that lasts. Divine timing is never random, never careless, never cruel. It is intentional, loving, and wise. Even when you cannot understand the timeline, you can trust the heart behind it. Waiting does not mean your prayers are forgotten. It means they are being processed within divine wisdom. What God has promised will unfold in the right season, at the right moment, in the right way. And when it arrives, you will recognize that the timing was not slow, it was perfect. When we say that your pain is producing purpose and testimony, we are recognizing a truth that often feels impossible to be. Leave while suffering is still fresh. Pain rarely feels meaningful in the moment. It feels confusing, unfair, heavy, and sometimes unbearable. The mind naturally asks why this happened, why it had to hurt this deeply, and why the season had to last so long. But pain is never wasted in the hands of God. What feels like breaking is often shaping something stronger, wiser, and more purposeful beneath the surface. Pain is a way of awakening depth within the soul. Comfort rarely challenges you to grow beyond what you already know. Ease does not require courage, resilience, or surrender. But pain stretches inner capacity. It forces reflection. It creates awareness. It pushes the heart toward transformation. While you may not choose the struggle, God uses it to develop qualities that could not form any other way. Compassion, humility, patience, discernment, perseverance, and spiritual maturity are often born in adversity. Your testimony begins forming long before you realize it. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of endurance is shaping a future story that will one day strengthen others. What you survive becomes proof of God's faithfulness. What you overcome becomes evidence of divine grace. Your wounds become wisdom. Your struggle becomes credibility. People connect most deeply with authenticity, not perfection. The pain you walk through equips you to speak hope into places you once bled. Pain also clarifies values and priorities. When life hurts, superficial concerns fade. What truly matters becomes clearer. Relationships deepen. Faith becomes personal rather than theoretical. You learn what you truly need versus what you simply desired. This clarity reshapes decisions, habits, and direction. It refines your life path with purpose rather than distraction. Suffering strips away false identities. When comfort, achievement, approval, or control are shaken, you discover who you are beneath those layers. You realize your worth is not tied to performance or circumstances, but rooted in God's love. This identity transformation builds unshakable confidence. You no longer depend on external validation to feel secure. That inner stability becomes a powerful foundation for future influence and leadership. Pain also increases spiritual sensitivity. You become more attentive to God's presence, more responsive to his guidance, and more dependent on his strength. Prayer deepens. Worship becomes sincere. Trust matures. The heart learns to lean on divine grace rather than personal ability. This intimacy becomes one of the greatest gifts pain can produce. Your story becomes a bridge for others. When someone else faces a similar struggle, your experience gives them hope that survival is possible, healing is real, and faith can endure hardship. Your journey carries authority, not because you avoided pain, but because you walked through it with God. Testimony carries power because it reveals what God can do in real life, not just in theory. Pain teaches empath. It softens the heart. It expands understanding. It removes judgment. When you have suffered, you become more patient with the weaknesses of others. You learn how to listen, comfort, and encourage without minimizing someone's struggle. Your compassion becomes a reflection of God's love in action. There is also creativity hidden in pain. Many people discover new purpose, direction, or calling through adversity. Pain awakens gifts that comfort could not awaken. It pushes you to think differently, live differently, and serve differently. What once wounded you can become the very area where you bring healing to others. Purpose does not always look dramatic or public. Sometimes purpose shows up quietly in character, consistency, and faithfulness. It appears in how you treat people, how you handle pressure, how you respond to disappointment, and how you remain grounded when life shakes. These inner transformations carry eternal value. Pain reshapes perspective. What once felt catastrophic may later feel formative. What once felt like loss may later feel like redirection. With time, you begin recognizing that some doors closed for your protection, some relationships ended for your growth, and some disappointments redirected you toward better alignment with God's plan. The testimony God builds through your pain is not meant to glorify suffering, but to glorify redemption. The story is not about how much you hurt, but about how faithfully God carried you through the hurt. Your scars. Ours become reminders of survival, healing, and divine presence. Even unresolved pain can still carry purpose. You may not have every answer or complete closure, yet your trust in God through uncertainty becomes a testimony of faith. Sometimes the story is not about full resolution, but about sustained endurance and unwavering trust. Pain also teaches gratitude on a deeper level. Simple joys become meaningful. Peace becomes precious. Relationships become cherished. Life becomes more intentional. Gratitude rooted in survival carries authenticity and humility. There may be moments when you feel your pain has no purpose, when the weight feels pointless and exhausting, but purpose often unfolds gradually. You rarely recognize it while walking through the storm. It becomes clear in hindsight through growth, clarity, and the ability to help others navigate similar paths. Your pain is shaping wisdom that cannot be learned in comfort. It is producing resilience that cannot be taught in ease. It is forming compassion that cannot be developed without experience. And it is creating a testimony that will one day speak louder than your struggle ever did. One day you will look back and realize that the very season you thought was breaking you was actually building strength, clarity, faith, and purpose within you. Your pain will no longer define you. Your testimony will. When we speak of God's compassion bringing healing and restoration, we are describing the heart of how God responds. DS to human pain. Compassion is not distant sympathy or passive concern. It is deep, active love that moves toward brokenness with the intention to heal, restore, and strengthen. God does not observe suffering from afar. He steps into it with tenderness, patience, and unwavering care. When you are hurting, you are not met with judgment, pressure, or impatience. You are met with mercy. Human responses to pain are often rushed and shallow. People may tell you to move on, to be strong, to stop thinking about it, or to get over it quickly. But healing does not operate on a schedule. Emotional wounds cannot be forced to close by willpower alone. God understands the pace of the heart. He does not hurry your recovery or shame your weakness. He walks with you through every stage of healing, honoring your process instead of rushing your progress. Compassion creates safety. When you know you are loved without conditions, your heart relaxes. Fear loosens its grip. Defensive walls begin to come down. In that safe space, healing becomes possible. God's compassion assures you that you are not a burden, not an inconvenience, and not a disappointment. You are deeply valued even in your brokenness. That assurance allows you to open your heart honestly instead of hiding your pain. Restoration often begins internally before it becomes visible externally. God first restores peace where anxiety lived, hope where despair ruled, and confidence where fear dominated. These inner changes quietly reshape how you think, respond, and relate to the world. Even if circumstances remain the same for a season, your inner world begins to heal. You start responding differently to triggers. You gain emotional stability. You develop resilience. This internal restoration prepares you for external breakthroughs later. God's compassion also corrects distorted beliefs that pain often creates. Trauma, disappointment, rejection, and loss can reshape how you see yourself, others, and God. You may begin believing you are unworthy, unsafe, forgotten, or incapable. God's gentle love patiently rebuilds truth within you. He reminds you of your value, your identity, and your purpose. Healing is not just emotional relief, it is the restoration of truth in the heart. Healing is rarely instant because God is not only treating symptoms, but healing roots. Surface relief without deep restoration would leave wounds vulnerable to reopening. God addresses the deeper layers of pain, the hidden fears, the unspoken grief, and the unconscious patterns formed through past experiences. His compassion goes deeper than human understanding. He heals completely, not temporarily. Restoration also includes rebuilding trust. Pain often damages trust in people, in life, and even in God. God does not force trust to return quickly. He earns it gently through consistency, presence, and faithfulness. As you experience his steady care over time, trust slowly rebuilds. You learn again that you are safe in his hands. G. OD's compassion invites rest rather than performance. You do not have to prove strength or worthiness to receive healing. You are loved simply because you are his. That truth releases pressure and allows your soul to breathe. Rest itself becomes part of healing. When the nervous system calms, the heart softens. Peace becomes a healing environment. Restoration is not about erasing the past, but redeeming it. Scars may remain, but they no longer control your present. Memories lose their emotional grip. Painful chapters become sources of wisdom rather than wounds. God transforms what once hurt into insight, maturity, and compassion. Restoration gives you the ability to move forward without carrying the same emotional weight. God's compassion also empowers forgiveness, not forced forgiveness, but healing-driven forgiveness. As the heart heals, bitterness loosens naturally. Resentment loses its power. Forgiveness becomes a release rather than a struggle. This freedom allows emotional energy to return to life, joy, and creativity. Healing brings clarity. As wounds heal, confusion lifts. Decisions become healthier. Boundaries become clearer. Self-respect increases. Relationships improve. You begin choosing peace over chaos, truth over fear, and growth over stagnation. Restoration reshapes your lifestyle and mindset in practical ways. God's compassion also restores joy gradually. Laughter returns, hope resurfaces, desire for the future awakens. You begin dreaming again. You start expecting goodness instead of anticipating disappointment. This renewal reflects the soul returning to wholeness. Healing does not mean you will never feel pain again. It means pain will no longer dominate your identity or control your reactions. You become stronger emotionally, wiser spiritually, and more grounded mentally. You learn how to navigate challenges with stability rather than fear. God never uses your pain against you. He uses it for you. His compassion ensures that nothing you suffered is wasted. Every tear becomes part of your healing story. Every struggle becomes part of your restoration journey. The ultimate goal of God's compassion is not merely comfort, but wholeness. Wholeness means living freely, loving deeply, trusting wisely, and walking confidently in your God-given identity. Healing restores alignment between your heart, mind, and spirit. When you allow God's compassion to meet you where you are, healing unfolds naturally. Restoration becomes inevitable. Your life begins reflecting peace rather than pressure, hope rather than heaviness, and strength rather than survival. That is the quiet, powerful work of divine compassion. When we say that you are moving forward, even when it feels slow, we are acknowledging one of the most powerful realities of spiritual and personal growth. Progress is not always measured by immediate visible change. Human beings are naturally impatient. We want results, solutions, and breakthroughs right away. We compare our journey to others, expecting milestones to happen on our timeline. Yet, spiritual development, healing, and divine alignment rarely operate according to our sense of urgency. Even when the external world seems stagnant, internal transformation is constantly taking place. You are advancing spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Even when circumstances suggest otherwise, movement does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle, almost imperceptible. It may be a shift in perspective, a newfound patience, a softening of the heart, or an increase in resilience. These small changes accumulate over time, forming a foundation for greater breakthroughs. What feels like stagnation is often preparation. God's work is quiet and methodical, and he often prefers to cultivate strength, wisdom, and character before revealing the results. Every step, no matter how small, contributes to your journey toward purpose and fulfillment. The process of moving forward slowly teaches endurance. When life pushes you into prolonged seasons of waiting, difficulty, or uncertainty, you are forced to develop stamina. Endurance is built not in comfort, but in persistence through challenges. Each day you continue to trust God, pray, hope, and act in faith. You are strengthening your ability to navigate future trials. Even if the pace feels frustrating, progress is happening. Your faith, character, and resilience are growing in ways you cannot yet measure. Slow progress also builds humility. Immediate results often create pride or overconfidence, while delayed progress teaches dependence on God. When change is gradual, you learn to lean on Him consistently rather than taking credit for what is not fully manifested. Humility does not weaken you. It aligns you with God's wisdom and ensures that when blessings arrive, you are prepared to steward them wisely. There is also a spiritual dimension to moving forward slowly. God often works in unseen ways, molding your character, opening spiritual awareness, and aligning circumstances before the breakthrough appears. Much of what He does in your life happens in the invisible realm. Your prayers, tears, and acts of faith may not yield immediate results in the physical world, but they produce spiritual momentum. Your endurance, faithfulness, and obedience are creating a harvest that is not yet visible, but is guaranteed by God's promise. Slow progress teaches patience, which is a cornerstone of spiritual maturity. Patience allows you to remain steady and faithful while circumstances seem unchanging. It transforms waiting into an opportunity for growth instead of frustration. When you practice patience, you develop peace in the process, understanding that God's timing is perfect and that the delays are part of His plan. Every moment of faithful patience strengthens your ability to navigate life without despair, even when outcomes take longer than you expected. Even when movement is slow, it is still movement. You are not standing still. Every small decision to trust, every act of courage, every prayer lifted, and every step taken in faith contributes to progress. Sometimes the most profound changes are internal and cannot be measured externally. You may not see the results yet, but the inner work God is doing is irreversible. Strength, resilience, wisdom, clarity, and hope are being solidified in your heart, mind, and spirit. Slow progress also builds perspective. It helps you appreciate the journey and understand the value of preparation. When breakthroughs finally arrive, you recognize that every challenge, setback, and period of waiting was part of the story. You see that the struggle shaped you, strengthened you, and prepared you to receive what you could not have handled at the beginning of the process. Patience allows you to embrace the journey, not just the destination. Your small, consistent steps forward create momentum. Momentum compounds over time, just like water slowly carving a canyon. Repeated faithfulness and persistence shape your life in ways that instant gratification cannot. You may feel as though nothing is happening, but each moment of persistence is bringing you closer to the fulfillment of God's promises. Moving forward slowly also teaches trust. When outcomes are delayed or unclear, you learn to rely on God's character rather than your ability to control circumstances. Trust deepens when you continue to act faithfully despite uncertainty. You begin to understand that God is in control and that His timing is perfect, even if it does not match your expectations. It is important to recognize that slow progress does not mean God is inactive. Every day He is aligning opportunities, preparing people, opening doors, and shaping circumstances for your benefit. What appears stagnant is often a highly active period in the spiritual and unseen realms. Your diligence, perseverance, and trust are creating the conditions for the breakthroughs you desire. Even when slow progress feels discouraging, it is essential to remember that God honors faithfulness, not speed. He values those who remain steadfast, who continue to trust, and who persevere. The journey itself produces growth, and every faithful step, no matter how small, is evidence of movement. Eventually, the accumulation of small steps leads to visible change. The breakthrough comes. The restoration happens. The doors open, and when it does, you look back and realize that every slow step, every small act of faith, every period of endurance was preparing you for exactly what is now unfolding. You see that the pace was necessary, the timing was perfect, and the preparation was essential. Even when life feels stagnant, you are not stationary. You are moving forward slowly but surely. God is orchestrating everything behind the scenes, and every act of faith, endurance, and patience contributes to the momentum that will carry you into your next season. Slow progress is still progress, and as long as you remain faithful, you are advancing toward the promises and purposes God has prepared for you